Today we're going to be installing a rear spacer lift on my 2010 Toyota FJ Cruiser. This will be the same for all years of the FJ Cruiser, as well as the 5th generation 4Runner, which is the 2010 and newer model. So first step is we're going to remove the tires on both the driver and passenger side and jack up the vehicle. And after that, we're ready to get started on the install. Now, one thing you will want is a set of jack stands. You'll see I've currently got it sitting on the jack stands, and then a floor jack, and really even a second jack is kind of helpful here so you can kind of get the axle to shift back and forth to get you the clearance that you need for the coil springs. And then we are going to start off by removing the sway bar link arms here. You'll see we've got a little nut on top. This is a 12mm nut. You're going to need some sort of like channel locks or wrench or something down here on the bottom to keep this from spinning as you remove that. And then once we've got that off, do the same thing on the other side of the vehicle. Then we're ready to remove the nut on the top of the shock here. I believe that on the stock shocks you're looking at a 17mm nut, and then since I've got the Bilstein 5100s, this is a 19mm. You could remove the entire shock, but there's really no need for it. We basically just need to disconnect it so we can drop down the axle. We'll start off by putting channel locks on the bottom here, wrench up top. This would be a nice time to have ratcheting wrench. Unfortunately, I do not have any. All right, once we've got this nice and loose, go ahead and pull off that nut, this washer. Make sure you orient yourself on the direction so you don't forget. And I'll pull off this top piece, and then we'll do the same thing on the passenger side. Next, we're going to do the same thing here on the shock. Channel locks to keep this from spinning. I've already loosened the nut most of the way here. Once again, nice to have a ratcheting wrench for this step. And we'll go ahead and remove this top nut. Get the nut off by hand so we don't lose it. And then I'll pull off this washer. If it's kind of stuck, you can use a screwdriver to kind of pry it out gently. That. And once we've got this off, once again, make sure you keep the direction correct for reinstalling, and then do the same thing on the passenger side. All right, so now we're ready to drop down the axle and get those coils free. So we got the floor jack under the rear differential. Make sure when you're doing this step that you don't let it drop down far enough that it damages the brake lines. There is a little bracket on there that you can disconnect to get you clearance that you need for that if necessary. But to save the step, I'm going to drop it down just far enough that I don't need to do that. All right, so I've got the floor jack on the other side now, raising up that end of the axle to drop this end down to give us more clearance to get the coil spring out. And then we're going to use a set of spring compressors. I'll put a link to these in the description below. You can also generally borrow these for free from most auto parts store if you want to stop by your local auto parts store and ask them. This step of the process is considered a little bit dangerous, so use them with caution. We're going to go ahead and take a set of these on each end of the coil springs, compress those down so that we can remove it. So I've got one of the compressors over on this side. We're going to try to get the other set as close as possible to being on the other side. So go ahead and pass that through. We got the little safety clip that goes on the other end. Get this one on this side, and then we'll start by hand tightening it to get it snug, and then we'll compress it the rest of the way. Clearance is a little tight on both ends, so I can't use my impact wrench like I typically would, although it's not necessarily considered all that safe anyway, so this may be for the best. So I'll spin several times on each end and then do the same thing on the other side, making sure we don't over compress one side versus the other. All right, once that's compressed quite a ways, we're going to be ready to pull it out. It's a little bit of a tight fit, but we're good. All right, so once the coil's out, we're going to remove this bump stop that's in here. Just going to pry that out. And then we've got the new spacer that's going to sit right on top here. And with some spacer kits, this bump stop will go right back in. But you'll see with this one, it actually doesn't fit. And I gave them a call because I was a little unsure about this. And what they said is that with this spacer kit, you don't reinstall this bump stop. The reason for that is because we're adding that additional inch of lift, the bump stop is really ineffective, because if this were to compress, you're not even going to reach that bump stop. And it's really a secondary bump stop anyway. We've got one right here, so apparently we just remove it. So with that removed, we're going to go ahead and just reinstall this now. Now, reinserting the coil here may be a little bit trickier because we've got the additional inch on top, so it's a tighter squeeze now. You may want to lift up the other side of the axle a bit more or compress your springs a tad more. And then when we insert the coil, the thing here to keep in mind is you want the spacer to be sitting flush here, so you don't want it to come off at all. Make sure it's fully seated. And then at the bottom here, where the coil dead ends, you want to line that up right back in here, and you'll see that there's a little metal plate that just slides up against. So I'll go ahead and slide this in here. Get that lined up. And then we'll go ahead and drop that end of the axle down a little bit, get this all lined up, and start putting things back together. All right, so we've got that end of the axle dropped down all the way, so we are ready to remove the spring compressors. We want to go back and forth between the two sides so that we're releasing that tension evenly. If you go on one side, it could be potentially dangerous. So again, go back and forth between the two sides until we've got them all the way loose. All right, so with the spring compressors off, we're ready to re-secure the upper mount here on the shock. So I use the floor jack over here on the driver's side to lift up the shock so that all of these threads are showing through. And once we've got those showing through, then we're gonna go ahead and take this rubber piece here, slide it down on top. The metal washer, this side facing down, goes on top of that. And then we've got our nut. It's going to go on top of that. We'll start by getting that hand tight, and then we'll use a wrench to secure it the rest of the way. And starting out, we can go ahead and just hold on to the shock here to keep it from spinning, but as this gets tighter, we will need the channel locks again to make sure it's nice and secure. So with the shock secured up here, we're ready to do the same thing on the passenger side, repeat the whole process, and then once we've done that, then we'll get to the link arm here on the sway bar. So once the other side is done, we're ready to reconnect the link arm on the sway bar. So we'll go ahead and pull up the link arm here, put on this little rubber piece. The metal washer here that goes on top of that. And we've got our nut. We'll go ahead and hand tighten this, and then we'll do the other side the same before tightening it up. If you tighten this all the way and then go to the other side, it's going to be a little bit trickier to try to get that in position. With that other side done here, we're going to go ahead and take our channel locks. Put on here, just hold that so it's nice and secure. And then we're going to tighten up this nut. Again, having ratcheting wrench would be pretty nice. So the last step is to get the wheels and tires reinstalled, and then you also want to take it down and get a realignment done once you're done with the lift kit. Really pleased with how it turned out. We added the additional inch in the lift, so rather than sagging in the back, we've now got just a little bit more height in the rear than what we've got in the front. Just the look that I'm after. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. For more Toyota videos, be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, thanks for watching.